once a Greenschool parent. You're always part of the Greenschool family. So Terj has his kids graduating here. He runs Seven Stones, and he's going to talk more about that. And Terj, thank you so much for coming here today. With no further ado, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I got really excited about hearing about all the potential in the room. And there is so much going on. Like Tracy was saying too, traditionally Bali has been a lot about tourism and property, but there's so much else going on and so much opportunities out there. And the bridge is doing a tremendously good job creating, that space for people to be able to find out more about the do's and don'ts and how to set up businesses and not. When I do these talks, I tend to warn people. I'm extremely passionate about Indonesia. I have been here. I came actually first time 1970 when I was 3 years old, so that gives you a guess on how old I am. My parents was here before me, and actually an auntie on my dad's side was a nurse in a lepra hospital before Indonesia was even an independent country. So we have known Indonesia for a long time. And like Carol was saying, I had 3 kids at Greenschool. All daughters. The oldest one was Miss Indonesia 2017. So we're definitely here to stay. And before I go into Seven Stones and the business side of things, the longer you keep your kids here, the better humans they become. It's just an amazing experience. So Seven Stones is a company that does too many things actually, but we focus on what we call market entry services. So we help people setting up PMAs, we do the accounting, we do tax advice, legal advice, the investment report, some of the do's and don'ts and that Tracy also mentioned, contractual work, real estate, any kind of partnership. We operate 4 offices now in Bali. Our main office is in Seminyak, but we have a branch in Ubud, we have a branch in Uluwatu, and we have a branch in Canggu, and then we also have a big office in Jakarta where we work closely with, in particular, Nordic investors, but really anyone, because we have a very close relationship with the Nordic embassies. So that company provides maybe a little bit of a different market entry service. Big companies that comes in, they may not be ready to invest a lot in Indonesia. They kind of want to get their feet wet and dip their toes a bit. And then once they have some partners and, feel for it, then they go full on and set it up. That office is also a extension of all our, we call it partners in growth. So all our clients, our business partners, they can freely utilize that office to explore opportunities, whether that is fundraising, partners, marketing, and so on in Jakarta, which is the capital of Indonesia. So in addition to the offices, we are now creeping close to 60 employees, I think 55, 56, which covers lawyers, tax specialists, some real estate. What else do we have? We even have a Russian speaking and a Russian in our team. That's not his fault, although he's a Russian. He's actually a nice person and takes care of a wide range of clients, not just Russians. And we have a couple of lawyers, notaries, and tax consultants there too. So that leads us to what we are in Indonesia. You'll see that there is 4 different, actually 5, but there is one who is only for Indonesians, what they call a single entity setup. But there's 4 different types of businesses: micro, small, medium, and large. And the reason for why the 10 billion paid up capital appears is because expats or foreigners are only allowed to do what's defined as a large entity, and that's where the 10 billion paid up capital comes up. So that answers that question. We have in the new, and I think someone was asking Tracy about, Bali, Indonesia, and the differences between that. There is no differences in legal terms. Everything now is into what's known as the OSS system. So it's an online single submission that had some challenges over the last couple of years. 2018 was when we saw the first setup of this, but it's getting better and better and easier to deal with. But there's an enormous amount of data that needs to be dragged in from different ministries, different provinces, different regencies. Some of these are not ready. Some of them don't want to be ready. There's a bit of resistance to fit into it. But it gets better and better. And in theory, And in practical terms, you can set up a company actually in a day today. But we tend to not recommend that because you will always end up with some mistakes on the business streams and aspects that you need to rectify later. So we tend to say a couple of weeks. But it operates with a risk factor, so 4 different risk factors from low, medium, high risk to a high risk business. So there's different qualifications. If it's a low risk business, and once you've gone into the OSS system, established a company, and we'll look at the steps later, you're in business. Medium, low risk, then certification of standard, you need to pull that down. And then if you go up to 3 and 4, these are typically F&B businesses, some kind of factories, productions, and so on. It's a bit more complicated, and there is a need for extra licenses issued. So PMA is a foreign investment company. It can be owned by 1, 2 people or many. And this is really, like also Tracy was saying, the only way that a foreigner can invest. There is other ways of, maybe you can operate as some kind of investor into a local PT-PMDN or a domestically owned company. But those have certain risk factors and so on that you may want to consider. But some people do that, so they operate as a lender or a provider of capital to domestic companies. Paid up capital, there were some questions on that, and it says 10 billion. There will be lawyers who will say you have to comply with this in 60 days. I share Tracy's view. That's not true. And when you start the company, the notary or whoever does that work for you, consultants, agencies, whatever it is, will ask you to sign what's called a statement letter, or surat pernyataan as it's called in Indonesian, which kind of works a little bit like a promissory note. You make a statement that you've made that capital available in some shape or form, either cash or assets or something like that. And then you go from there. So you technically owe your company then paid up capital, which you can comply with over time. So you can actually set up a company today without putting in anything. We don't recommend to not operate a business. Like during COVID, we see a lot of people that were desperate to sustain themselves here, and they set up companies. There was agents that sold investor kitas in companies, so they bundled up 20 people and made them commissioners and directors and all sorts of things. That's not a good route to go. But you can set up a company today and then comply with that capital over time, whether you rent a villa that goes against the paid up capital, you buy a car, rent a car, all of these aspects you can book against the paid up capital over time. You must have a minimum of 2 shareholders. That can be 2 companies, 2 individuals, or a combination of it. Minimum 1 director and 1 commissioner. The director must be a tax resident of Indonesia. So if it's yourself, then you need to be aware that you will be a tax resident, which may at some stage impact your global income that Indonesia may look at. And if anyone tells you that the Indonesian tax office have no idea what they're doing and don't see things, that's absolutely not true. They're very sophisticated. The way they work is a bit more passive. They're not like the US can be very aggressive. I'm from Norway. We get taxed up to over our ears, and that's why I'm here, not there. But they're very passive, and they'll see things evolve, and then they'll come, and then you'll end up with a bill that you probably didn't calculate with, or someone told you that you shouldn't worry about, and then it becomes an issue later down the road. It's compulsory to hire local staff, minimum 1, hopefully 2. This impacts how you then register for the BPJS, or the pension and insurance fund in Indonesia. And also impacts your capability to then pull down all the tax identifications. As a director of the company must have that, and also as the company. So again, on the paid up capital, 75% of that can be debt structured, so you can owe money to your company, and the 2.5 billion then becomes what you really need to not worry about, but try to comply with. Some people try to go down the route of putting in 2.5 billion, taking it out, putting it in again, and do that 4 times, and I think, I've complied now, and they report that to the investment ministry or BKPM. But then the tax office comes and says, where's the 7.5 billion? And you can't answer that, so they'll tax you as a dividend, and you'll get a 10% plus corporate taxes on top of that. So that's not smart. Tax office only wants to see what you're really doing in real terms and what they can tax you on. There is different types of kitas that you can get from that. As an investor, shareholder in that company, if you have more than 1 billion or 1 billion and up, you can get a investor kitas, which means you're only a shareholder. You can do some basic works, obviously being part of decisions and so on of that company. You can then also get a investor kitas as a commissioner, which then you're technically overseeing on behalf of the shareholders what the directors is doing, and then you get a directors and investor kitas, which obviously is the person that then runs and operates the company and is also liable for any and all activities, compliance with taxes, permits, da-di-da-di-da-di-da. It's also possible to then sponsor working kitas. You can hire expats into that. The Labor Department of Indonesia, without saying anything bad, is probably the most complicated department to work with because you need their engagement and involvement in this. So it can be a bit of a lengthy and complicated process, but that's possible. Register for the BPJS, so the director also must be part of that. BPJS is the insurance and pension fund of Indonesia, which then are pulling everyone into. And your business as a PMA must be registered in a zoning allowed for that business. It doesn't mean that you can do businesses, again, like Tracy was saying, you can go to other islands and other areas of Indonesia, but your actual address and office needs to be in a commercial zone or a tourism zone area. And it must actually have a real office location. You'll see, even us will talk about virtual office, and a lot of people talk about virtual office. There's no such thing. It only means that you're registered in an office. Like us, I don't know, we have quite a few that use our address, and you know, that becomes the space, and then the people work from home or they work from wherever they want to be. This is kind of the steps that you go through, and like I said, it's possible to do in a day. We kind of say a couple of weeks to give everyone time to understand. So you choose the business, and Indonesia has a very wide range of KBLIs or business streams, which also runs back to the risk factors. And someone was asking about what's open for foreigners and not. So there's a very long list of that. There is something called it used to be called the Negative Investment Act. It's now called the Positive Investment Act. So there's 246 business streams. So there's 100% open for foreigners. And there is 89 who is UMKM or SMEs protected, which needs some kind of partnership. The percentage of that will be different. And then there's a few that is 100% closed. That's normally, arms deals, alcohol, gambling, and the stuff that they don't want expats to get involved into. So you go through this, choose your business, company name. It needs to have 3 words. They can be Indonesian, they can be English. So we check that no one else has used what you particularly want to call your company. You can have a different brand. It doesn't matter. You can call yourself, whatever you want, and then operate under a different brand. Like we have several companies under our brand as Seven Stones, and then you get into the Articles of Association, Deed of Establishment, NPWP or the tax ID, and then the business identification, and if any need, depending on the risk aspect, other licenses to pull down. Some of the do's, and someone was saying, I think it was the gentleman saying, you have to have a local partner. You don't, absolutely not, but it is highly recommended to cooperate with local businesses, and there's a few reasons for that. Some businesses then have additional tax benefits in particular business streams. And Indonesian economy, when you talk about UMKMs, which is the SMEs, is 60% of Indonesia's economy. 97% of the labor is into small, medium, and micro enterprises. So anyone wanting to do business here, even the government, can see they're on a journey to enhance all these aspects as much as they can. And I think as expats, it's compulsory for us to do that too. Understand the law, and like Tracy was saying, it can be quite complicated and different from home, sometimes very open-ended. I think you asked a few questions on the enforceable aspects, and I agree with Tracy that there's ways of structuring agreements, and it takes a bit of dialogue in what you're trying to achieve and so on. But the main point is that if you ever have an issue, ignorance is no argument under Indonesian law or any law for that sake. So you cannot use, I didn't know, which a lot of people say, I wasn't aware, and so on. Again, hire local employees, the right business strategy, which is also something we can help with, even to marketing. The guy in the back running the camera here, he's one of our marketing guys, so he's making sure we have some good memories and exposure of this. And then the right investments. There's an awful lot of opportunities out there, more and more into all kinds of industries in addition to the sort of traditional tourism and real estate. But I've seen you have something called United Founders, which is 90, I think, entities that do chocolates, all kinds of industries, farming, and so on and so on, tech apps, and so on. There's something called Bali Business Club. So there's all these groups and networks that actually has a lot of opportunities for people that want to invest or learn more about the do's and don'ts, and they have gatherings and opportunities as well. Don't ignore taxes. Indonesia, again, is not aggressive. They're passive. They'll sit back. You can actually, as long as you report the taxes and don't pay, they're kind of okay with that. They'll charge you a interest rate on that on a monthly basis. So if you don't have the money, cash flow, or you forgot for a few months, that's not an issue. But be diligent with that. It has been common, unfortunately, in tourism industry to run 3 different set of books, one for the owners and one for the real picture and then one for tax purposes. That has some extreme penalties to it. So if you get caught, you can get fined something like 200 to 600% of what they find of what you've been avoiding to pay. Also important to find the type of business that you're running, so the business stream fits. But again, there is so many different KPIs and aspects, and if you do something different from what you set up to, as long as that doesn't conflict with the risk aspect, you can argue that that's an offspring of earnings and income and so on. So I think the lady here asked about covering multiple businesses. You can do that, and you can look at what KPIs that you must have into it. Choose a business location and be aware of zoning. Right now, the zoning for some parts of Bali is still not into the OSS system, but most of it is. And that means there is a big thing now with something called LSD, and it's not that type of LSD. It's has to do with rice field protection, because Indonesia has a policy now of fear of food shortages and what goes on in Europe. So they have said no more conversion of rice fields, and this was issued in mid-June, except if you're in a residential area or something like that. But if you're in a greenbelt farming area or other zoning, you cannot convert the rice field at all, which is good. So be careful with that. They'll say things like, oh, the Banjar agrees to this and therefore you can do it, or my brother is someone in the government and therefore it's okay. It's not, and they'll have issues. Those that have built in green belts, which is quite a few, will now be penalized with taxes and penalties, and the government then hopes that they can tax and penalize them so much that they give up and actually take down the buildings, and green belts stay green belts. There is something called LKPM report, so it's an investment report of what you've done so far in terms of investments and activities, and that's filed every quarter, so that is to the investment ministry. And why Indonesia? It is still complex, but Indonesia, 6 weeks ago, World Bank had a report about the downfall of the world and possible recession, except Indonesia. And they concluded that report saying Indonesia today is probably one of the strongest economies on the planet. Yesterday, there was a report from Asian development banks who upgraded the growth of the Indonesian economy from 5.2 to 5.4. So the rest of the world is struggling, I think, except India and Indonesia. And China has downgraded a bit, but still has a strong growth. But the rest of the world is struggling. But OSS, or the system, is getting better and better and easier and more clarity, more and more of the web pages of the Indonesian government. They speak English. You can find information out there. Obviously, one of the largest economies in Southeast Asia. And if you look at Southeast Asia, Indonesia and almost anything will be 50% of the market. IT, whatever it is, big, young, vibrating, dynamic population, 270-something million. And by 2030, it'll be the 4th largest economy in the world. This is not by coincidence. This is a path. You can read some of our blogs and newsletters about this. We brag about this all the time. It was earlier said to be 2050, but it's not going to happen in 2030. Tourism industry recover. The domestic market is back. In terms of expat, and I was just discussing with William here on recovery of the expat market is probably just around 35%, but it feels like 100% in certain areas, particularly Ubud, Canggu, maybe Bukit, but still many areas are still very, very quiet. But you can already see that U-shaped recovery happening. And again, yeah, we talked about the fourth most populated country. Corporate. So taxes on this, a PMA or PMDN, there is no difference between whether it's a domestic or foreign-owned companies. Some people will say, don't set up a PMA, just do a partnership with me in a domestic company and the taxes are less. It's not true. But up to, for the first 3 years, and up to 4.8 billion, which is about $300 and something thousand revenue, you actually only pay 0.5% from the revenue as a corporate tax. Then from 4.8 up to 50, you become VAT liable and you pay 11%. And if you go beyond 50 billion, which is already a substantial company, then it's 22%. The dividend tax of Indonesia is a final income tax of 10%. And Indonesia today has a regulation that if you reinvest your earnings or dividends into another company, some bank bonds, real estate, whatever it is, it's tax-free or dividend tax-free. So Indonesia is almost like a tax haven in many ways, and they want to attract foreigners in all shapes and forms. Yeah, report your taxes actually every month, and it's important to also report the taxes of the president director. And we can see now that for a company that hasn't been diligent with their tax report, it gets red flagged and you can't extend your quitas, the work permit or the investor quitas. So the system is more and more integrated and talk to each other. Income tax, and when you structure this as a director, you have to pay yourself a salary, but minimize that because the personal income tax quickly go up to 30%. 35 is only if you make something like $300,000 or more. But we recommend that you push as much as possible out of the company in terms of dividend, because then you have the 10% final income tax. I guess that was it, quick and fast. And yeah, doing good business, doing good is always good for business. I guess that will allow for questions and answers. And we have a full team, so we'll hang out here. We'll have lunch with you. You can talk with our taxes and lawyers that actually understand the law. I don't, I just talk about it. And yeah.
Oh, thank you, Perry. Yeah. Okay. Besides Kate trying to talk to me, sorry about that. Does anyone have questions? So many, okay. So we like so many questions. That's good.
No, I think there's not very many detailed questions. I'm happy to discuss them over lunch. Sure. But tax rates and sorry.
No, we'll be here, and we put some flyers on the table over there. Not very eco-friendly using flyers, but you can pick them up. And we have also projects, eco projects, village projects, all kinds of stuff that we can talk about. So yeah, I reach out, and I try to respond to anyone sending messages as quick as possible. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. I get like 1,500 a day, but I'm open to that. And we're very similar to Tracy. We don't charge an hourly rate unless, I think we had one client who we spent 100 hours on, and then he ended up restructuring the company, and we made $500 on that. But we're very happy to talk to people, in any shape or form, and then hopefully we end up doing something together. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi there. Thinking about obviously approaching charitable kind of businesses, do you I've spoken to somebody about this, and they say, oh, you would have to set up an NGO, and that therefore you would not be liable for a salary and all these other kind of restrictions. Generally, when people are doing more charitable work, are they setting up private businesses and approaching it that way?
So you can do a CSR under a company, or you can set up an NGO, a foundation, and it's kind of similar to companies, which can be domestically owned or foreign owned. You can have a foundation set up by foreigners. It's quite complicated and has some aspects of needs from your home country through the Indonesian embassy before that goes through. So the best way is to actually find an Indonesian that becomes the founder, and then there's expats involving into that with different types of activities and what you want to do. An NGO can, or a foundation, yayasan as it's called, can receive grants, donations. It cannot take any money out, though. It can actually own companies, so it can have PTs under it, but it's a non-profit organization.
One more question on that.
Yeah.
Is it possible that you can't actually sell? You said you're trying to do fundraising.
So you can do fundraising and probably have products that is produced or acquired by the yayasan, and you sell those for a profit. You yourself should be a little bit careful on how much you expose yourself on that, because immigration might say that you're not allowed to do this and you have an immigration issue. But from a foundation perspective, no issue.
Another question. Yep.
So someone mentioned tax rates. I know that this is, you can get into a lot of detail, but maybe just big picture, if you're thinking of having a company that would operate a lot of its investments or so outside of Indonesia, often what people have told me is like, oh no, it doesn't make sense to set it all up in Indonesia, set it up in Singapore.
So I forgot that part. And if you have businesses abroad, depending a little bit on where, move them here because of the tax rate. Bill your clients, whatever it is, out of Indonesia and pay a lot less taxes than what you do. Some people are worried, like some of the European countries, the pension funds and so on, that you kind of lose points and value on that. But from a strict tax perspective and benefits from it, it makes an awful lot of sense. In the past, people used to do Singapore, and that makes sense if you're kind of setting yourself up as a regional player. You want to have businesses into other countries in the region. Singapore may have a slightly less tax rate than Indonesia, unless you reinvest, because then it's zero. Singapore doesn't have that. And it has something to do with security sometimes when you're looking at partners. Now there's a lot of talk also about tokens and crypto business, which Indonesia is actually fast-tracking, but still kind of allowing, but not quite yet. Then it makes sense that you can have a cryptocurrency or a token system mixed with fiat currency, and that can own a PMA into Indonesia. But to me, it no longer makes sense to have a Singapore entity. Set it up here. Gentleman in the back.
Thank you. So from your point of view, what would you say, what's the story behind Indonesia now becoming one of the world's largest economies? And I mean, what are the chances of attracting international capital? What's your story? Where's the country going? Are they making themselves attractive? Is it politically stable? Give us a bit of your thoughts on that, please.
Sign up for my newsletter.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
No, like I said, I'm passionate about Indonesia, and I've talked about this for more than 20 years because you can see it. You'll see we'll publish a blog or an article very soon called The Tipping Point, and I think Indonesia is hitting that tipping point. There's a few factors. They work very closely with World Bank and big international institutions. A lot of this has to do with the existing president, Jokowi, who is very PR-minded, so when he goes on his trips abroad, he'll sit with CEOs, he'll listen to them, and it's not just Elon Musk, it's every country he goes to, he does this. World Bank identified a few things that they told Indonesia or advised Indonesia to focus on. One was the bureaucracy, which is what the OSS system is. And if they wanted to change all of that, it would have taken them probably 10 to 15 years. So they created a sort of overall umbrella and pushed this through over a couple of years, which with the logistics and challenges is just massive, but they went and did it. Infrastructure was another thing. There's a massive amount of infrastructure. Bali is a little bit behind because they find it harder to make decisions than other provinces for some reason. But yeah, harbors, roads, all kinds of infrastructure is happening. Education was another thing that needs to open up, and slowly you'll see foreign universities and opportunities coming in, and a very young and energetic minister who today is the education minister. Nadim is in his name. He owns Gojek and a few other big companies, so he's very into the app and distant learning aspect. And then the health system. So you'll also see more and more they'll allow for doctors and hospitals. Right now you have a cooperation with Mayo Clinic building a huge hospital in Sanur. So that's the main factors. Politically stable, I would say yes. Indonesia doesn't have the tradition, as you see in Thailand. The military sort of runs out in the street once a year and create a bit of fuss. There is questions now what will happen 2 years from now in the election. Jokowi, some people still believe that he'll go for a third period, which is a bit sensitive because it needs a constitutional change. But that may happen. If that doesn't happen, I think everyone has realized that working together is good. And regardless of who, it's so highly lifted through the 2 periods of Jokowi that I think any president needs to follow that. If not, people will scream and shout and ask for changes. So yeah, I think Indonesia is stable.
Another question, please.
How is it with the kitas? If you own a business and then you have to pay for the investor kitas or the business kitas, working kitas, does that go on every year? You have to pay every year, or is there like a stop?
So for now, the investor kitas is issued either 1 or 2 years. So if you get 2 years, then you can renew after that for another 2 years. And after 2 times 2 years, you can get what's called a kitap, which gives you 5 years. There is talks about changing the investor kitas to 5 years. They talk about the digital nomad visa for 5 years, which doesn't exist. The last news that you've seen on digital nomad visa, there's no such thing. So the news are just, but yeah, 2 years and then you renew, which the rate should be a lot less when you renew it than when you actually do the first process. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I just want to know about let's say, for example, you have business online, right? But you don't have, and then the business is operated here in Indonesia, but you don't have actual physical store here in Indonesia, and as well as the physical office here. What is the rule and regulation about that?
I guess it depends on what it is that you're providing. If it's like online courses and so on, then you should technically have permits for that, and it comes under the educational ministry and department. Yeah, I guess some of our lawyers can probably help with the details of that. I know there's a lot of people who I'm online, so it's not an issue, but it may be. For you being Indonesian, I think the risk is very, very low.
Very, very good presentation. A couple things that you talked about piqued my interest, and I was wondering if you provide optimization services as part of what you do, because sometimes that's seen as a little, I don't know, dodgy. But that would be I would be interested in hearing about optimization, because especially for taxes.
Yeah, so we have this slogan saying partners in growth, and we actually mean that. So we work a lot with what we call roadmaps. So we try to see where you are, where you want to go. That may change, but to think as far as possible out in the future, like also Tracy said, at some stage you may or may not have an exit. We're going to launch together with a few other companies and persons what we call a business brokerage, because there's no such thing in Indonesia. There is a few, but they're not really doing it in a proper way, where we can help clients then with seeding capital, emissions, and exits, and tax optimization too. Yeah, we do that. So we'll advise on your structure based on your sort of roadmap forward. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any more questions? I'm sorry that I had to excuse. I needed to talk to Kate, you guys. Any more questions? No? That's good.
Very good.
That means that you did a good job.
We'll be here if anyone wants to have a chat when we do the round table or what Carol is planning.
Yeah.
Thank you.